Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Drawing School's Creative Conversation series. I'm Claudia Tobin, and tonight I'm delighted to welcome Anna Kiff and Timothy Hyman for a conversation about the paintings, drawings, and graphic work of Ken Kiff RA. This is a really wonderful opportunity, I think, for us to gain a special insight into Ken Kiff's work, and particularly into his unpublished books of drawings and writings, as Anna Kiff is the artist's daughter and she's been in charge of his estate since 2015. Anna studied literature and philosophy at Manchester University and went on to train as a traditional Chinese acupuncturist and set up her own practice. In 2001, she studied fine art at Central St Martin's, specialising in sculpture, and with a dissertation on Jackson Pollock, Rebecca Warren and Eva Hess. And in 2015, she took over the running of her father's estate. Timothy Hyman also has a long-standing connection to the artist, who he first met in the 1970s. Timothy is trained as a painter at the Slade, and he's had 10 solo shows in London. And he was elected a Royal Academician in 2011. His curatorial work includes curating narrative paintings in 1979 at the Arnolfini in ICA, which included 10 of Kiff's sequence paintings, as well as a wall of his street drawings. And Tim was also lead curator for Tate's Stanley Spencer retrospective. He's published 3 books with Thames and Hudson, including a book on Bonnard, a book on Sienese painting, and more recently, The World New Made, Figurative Painting in the 20th Century, which includes a section on Kiff's work. So welcome to you both. Really delighted to have you with us for this conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Claudia. I always accept anything to do with Ken, because I still think that he really should be more of a household name. I think he's an artist's name, and I think a lot of people in this audience will be are extremely interested in his work, but I don't think the general public knows so much about it. And so that's the right thing to do. Thank you. I was about to ask for the first image. Good. So that's, I just want to say that I'm not altogether clear whether it's Catherine or someone else who thought up this combination of Anna and me, or already thought up the idea of having Anna. I think it's a very good idea, although Anna would always emphasize, I think, that she doesn't do things like this. Nevertheless, she's the right person to go to, I think, and she's very articulate, with any luck, and I'm really interested to hear a bit more. One thing to be said is that Ken Kiff hardly showed until he was almost 40. And his first London one-man show he was 44. And he died young, essentially, younger than most of us. So it's a relatively short, maybe 25 years, in which he really came to an important position, I think, in British art, because he stood for the imagination. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways in which I think he felt often annoyed and frustrated was the emphasis on the School of London and on what I think Lawrence Gowan called representation as such, which he didn't feel was the center of what an artist is about. He felt that now the imagination is a very loaded term, and some people would say that Lucian Freud is as imaginative as a Ken Kiff, but I suppose I do mean imagination with the inflection on the word fantasy. And I think one of the most potent things that Ken ever said was that fantasy is a way of thinking about reality. So he doesn't make that slur almost on imagination, which I think is very common to English kind of what can I say, hardline positivist thinking that that fantasy is a kind of whimsy. I don't think that's good enough. I think that what Ken really, almost the burden of his life work is that the work of fantasy tells one about the nature of reality. And in that way, I think that this picture is a key image. It's part of what we might talk about later, the sequence, but it's bigger than most of them. It's about 4 foot. It's painted in acrylic. It's called Talking with a Psychoanalyst, Night Sky. And I just thought to get us going, I'd quote a few things which would give one the sense of what he's really about. He's not, as you might think at first, a loose kind of, what can I say, automatic artist. He's a very thoughtful artist, and his works tend to go on for rather a long time. I mean, this is something like 1973 to 9. Maybe, I think there's always some doubt about the dates, but certainly 4 years, I think. So he says about the thoughts that he had, is it formed out of 2 overlapping squares? Is the picture formed out of 2 overlapping squares? Are the 2 squares intended to be essentially different, each centered on a different person, and therefore a different aspect of the world? I think that's a very interesting way of putting a picture together. And it wouldn't apply, you see, in my view, to Lucian Freud. That sort of thinking is rather specific to composing and to imaginative art. Another direct quotation, he said, "The hill was yellow now, but if it stayed yellow, it might not stay a hill. And if it stayed a hill, it might not stay yellow." Now, that way of thinking that everything is mutable in the picture, the image is not a hard line. I mean, it may begin with a drawing, it may keep faithful to the drawing, but it might change completely. The painting would have a will of its own to some extent. And I think you'll feel that morphing and flexibility as we go on. Let's have the next slide. So Anna, I mean, you must have been in your early teens when Ken really began to have a career, as it were. Is that right? Something like that?
Possibly, but I wouldn't have noticed because I wasn't really interested being a teenager. So he just painted all the time. That's what he did, 7 days a week. Things that happened externally were kind of, for me, kind of incidental. But yeah, I'm aware now that in hindsight, it wasn't until quite, he didn't get going until he was quite old, relatively old. Yeah.
Did you feel something of his changing fortune at all?
We could afford to buy a washing machine. We used to go to the laundrette. He didn't, of course. My mum and my brother and I went to the laundrette every week, and we had no hot water. So our fortunes changed in that we could have hot water, and it sounds very kind of dramatic, but yeah, things like that. So I noticed those kind of things. We always had students coming out of the house the whole time, so that just carried on. Yeah.
I remember visiting your house in Wimbledon, South Wimbledon, and being struck by, I mean, it was quite a spick and span street up to a point with pollarded willows, rather striking pollarded willows. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, anyway, when I went, there was a whole sort of avenue of willow trees that had been cut. And
I thought they're horse chestnut trees, loads and loads of horse chestnut trees that formed a kind of an arch, huge arch as you walk down the road.
But Ken's house was less maintained.
Oh yes.
And I mean, whether that was poverty or negligence, it had an almost witchy feel to it compared to the other houses.
That's true. I felt a bit kind of like a witchy kid, to use your words. And yeah, no, it was to do with lack of money. There was no, yeah, it was a very odd house. We ate different food, we wore different clothes. My parents, I remember one fantastic little story, which I've told my friends several times. at school, primary school, I must have been about 7 or 8, and we were talking about careers, and one of the guys sitting next to me said, "Oh, what does your dad do?" And he said, I asked him what he did. He said, "My dad's a painter." And I said, "What does he paint?" He said, "Well, walls." "What does your dad paint?" I said, "Well, pictures." So the whole idea of anyone being a painter that painted picture was very unusual.
In a way that was difficult for you to take, or were you perfectly happy with that?
It was what was familiar.
Yeah.
It was just what was familiar to me. So yeah, I was used to it. I just got used to it. So yeah.
He did. I mean, he'd come out of a lot of teaching. I mean, he actually taught children. How I mean, in my world, there was perhaps, well, I met a Lebanese painter around the time I met Ken, and I was she asked me to see the sort of artist I was interested in, the artist I felt in a way part of. And when she saw Ken and some of the others, she said, "All your friends, they paint like rather damaged children."
Okay.
So I took that on board. Now, to some extent, I think Ken's experience of teaching educationally subnormal children probably was important.
Well, I can't comment on that. Obviously, that phrase is never to be used at the moment. But we never spoke about it. I wasn't born then, so I wasn't. When I was there, he was teaching at the Royal College and Chelsea and things like that. So, but I'm sure it had an impact, And if you're talking about his childhood, yes, he had a tricky childhood, as a lot of people have and have had. Yeah, but I mean, that's an interesting comment about childlike. I mean, people often say, "Oh, his paintings of childlike could be done by anyone," which is any child, which is absolutely not.
You get a lot of that, yeah.
I mean, what's interesting about this particular image you've got at the moment is out of the whole painting, this is the one image that has the least paint on it.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's kind of the center. And he always said that his men in his pictures weren't him, but this is categorically him, no question about it. So I thought, what's interesting about it being a drawing school conversation, that it looks to me like the paint is almost drawn on in terms of, not much has been worked with the face, but it actually says quite a lot. And it's in the middle of all of these kind of things on one side and things on the other side, the hills and the creatures and so on. So that was, yeah, but he looks kind of quite young and...
absolutely true, yeah.
Maybe.
I was struck by it too, but especially in the detail, seeing the detail. Do you want to go back to the main image?
No.
We're going to come to it again anyway. But let's have another one. So my understanding with the sequence is that it began partly because let's go forward to one more. He'd made some big pictures about, something like 4 foot square, not huge, but quite big, in tempera, which had just gone on and on and on. I mean, he described it as almost crazy. So literally 6 or 7 years overlaying, changing them all the time, and very much allowing them a will of their own. Yes. And he just felt it was too unproductive. I mean, he felt he had to have some other lighter sense of moving forward. Yeah. So he began, we'll go back to the previous one. Yeah. He began, I think, almost as a strategy to paint it smaller, not in tempera, but in acrylic on paper, which in a way is a throwaway medium, you might say, or a light, it doesn't have the same burden. And the very first one that he paints in the series is called Something Unknown Needs to Be Eaten or Drunk. Any thoughts about that one?
Well, it's the first of 197, I think, works. And it's not one of my favorites, but I think it's a fantastic starting point, And I think it was done in the 1971. And it's, well, to go back to the thing of fantasy, it has got, part of the everyday with the spoon and the bowl and the man of the chair and the kind of, then it's not the everyday. And it's kind of like, I suppose, how the everyday actually is. And sometimes we have, we go to work, we eat our breakfast and stuff, but then in our head, we've got a whole lot of other stuff going on, either consciously or subconsciously. And the mask we wear, I guess, the kind of images in the middle, is there a mask? Is it two faces, two sides of the same thing? And two yellow hills, actually, now look at it. And a crazy creek at the side. So,
and until I looked at it this time, actually, although I might have said it in prose, or as it were, I hadn't quite linked the two yellow hills to the other two yellow hills. Mm. That's odd, isn't it?
He liked yellow. And in fact, one of his students, Isao, he actually came from Japan to study yellow with Dad. And that's, yeah. And I think also this whole thing of colour, we've discussed narrative and form and so on, and the whole idea of colour almost colour narrating the form, I guess, or in a way, the kind of colour becoming an object in the work itself. And sometimes the actual object becomes irrelevant almost, or less relevant as the actual positioning of the colour and the juxtaposition of colour, and how they kind of, meld into each other sometimes, and sometimes they don't.
But yeah. yellow was one of the keys, wasn't it, I think, for him. Yeah. And it does give his work a sort of optimism, or even when it's most grotesque or could be threatening, it isn't somehow. Or at least it has that, but it comes through still as a positive.
I was questioning the concept of grotesque and threatening, and colours associated with that. So that's kind of an interesting idea to pursue. Yeah,
we're going to go on pursuing it, I think, because it's there in the imagery. Okay, let's go on. No, we'll maybe keep this one for a moment. I think this is one of the ones you selected.
Yes, I love it. I love the yellow, and I like. Well, here you've got a guy, but he's got kind of green in his head and pink and yellow in his head, and he's got green between his thumbs, and gashes of red down his forearm. And I just love the total incongruity of that, and yet it brings something else completely alive. And also it's about the self, he's painting a picture of himself. He's got sketches, he's got lots of paintings, it's all about men, obviously he's a man, painting images of, faces and so on. So I think it's kind of another, I find it interesting.
And he had a lot to say about the self and what it was or wasn't. It is always a construction in a sense, and yet it's vital to his work, isn't it?
We all have to have, the face we put on when we go out to work. We all have to have certain masks that we wear and so on. But yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I've got various bits of writing, and that he wrote. I'm trying to kind of find relevant points to pop them in.
Maybe that's a good moment straight away.
Yeah. Maybe not. I can't remember which one. Let's have a look. Hold on. Right, I've actually colour-coded.
Anna had a great sheaf of some of these unpublished manuscripts, actually. Yeah. Mostly not even typescripts, are they? It's not a lot.
No. I mean, this is. Can you see? Because I can't see myself.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
There's fantastic scribblings out that she always had. But one thing I did here is that he wrote here is he's talking about structure, and he says every shape in a picture, yes, even a figurative one, made up of variations on a single shape or two basic shapes. Then we have drama from the start. Trees, rocks, clouds in early Flemish painting, all rhyming, yet none bullied. Which was a lovely idea of the whole idea of, there is a kind of a dialogue between shapes and colours. Yeah. And the idea of kind of like this guy's face, he's got green in his face, and yet it all kind of comes together.
And in general, these big temperas do have a very different feel, very substantial feel compared to the sequence. Yeah. I mean, they probably haven't had quite their due yet.
No.
Yeah. I've seen some wonderful ones, but we're going to move on. Next one. This is the one in the Tate called Person Cutting an Image, which is not a very big picture,
No.
But obviously is again a sort of self.
Yeah, we had that in our living room wall. The only painting we ever had up was that one. For
Ah,
years, as I grew up, it's like a chef who eats baked beans. You know, the only picture we had on the wall was this one, and then it got sold.
that's very interesting.
Nice one. It's a good one.
And then shall we just see the pastel version? Now, did you say that was actually bigger than the?
No, I looked at the size of it, and actually, I thought it was smaller.
Yeah, I thought it was small. But did you say that that's become the Royal Academy diploma image?
No, that was one of the ones you didn't include.
Oh, that's one we didn't include. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that was also an orange man cutting a figure with a man watching him cutting the figure. Yeah. So there's a lot of being watched over and being seen and being observed.
And these you see are still before the sequence. Yeah. These are where he's still struggling to get any imagery down at all, in a way. Wouldn't you say? I mean, I think that,
well, this was done in yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know about that. I'm not sure what I think about that. That he's struggling to find some kind of imagery, or
he obviously had masses of imagery inside him, and that probably in graphic work too. I mean, I think he was drawing always, and this is one of the areas where you'll find making discoveries, isn't it?
Oh my God! You mean the sketchbooks?
Yeah. Oh
my God, it's fantastic. I've sold about 30 of them. I can just show you a whole bunch of sketches now if you want.
Why don't you show a few, just to get...
I'll put me on the screen so I can actually see.
Are any of them really early ones?
This is from, lots of them are in storage, but this book is 1981. Does that count as early?
Well, it's just about the time I met him, actually, about 2 years after I met him.
Well, it's got some writing on it, but that's one of them. And it is, there we go. Can we have her full screen for a moment, if possible? Can you do that? Full screen. Oh yes, great. Yes, that's fascinating. So basically, we went to India as a family, and he was an artist, as an artist, and there's a whole gathering of artists in a various part of the south of Delhi. And on the way home, we were going to go and visit the Taj Mahal, but we couldn't because there was a heat wave. And it was a heat wave for the Indians in India. It's like 48 degrees or something. So we didn't go. So this is what Dad was doing on the day that we didn't go to Taj Mahal.
Beautiful drawing, lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely. Same with some Indian friends that we met there. So yeah, bit of phallic stuff going on there. But I always love the way he draws so kind of, sometimes simply, you know, and sometimes with like loads of movement. And usually humorously, which I think is really important. This is another one from, you did the street exhibition years ago at the Serpentine. This is a sketch of the street.
We're going to see some of the other more elaborate versions, but this is a great theme. I think that he did sort of half fulfill, but my instinct was that he could have gone much further with the street thing.
I mean, I don't know whether you can jump forward to a number or two, but can we do that? Is that possible? Or is that not a good idea?
No, do. Fine. Oh, well, I don't jump forward in the sides and probably get too complicated.
Okay, fine. Right, then we'll do another one.
Sorry, we could have slipped it in.
All right.
I haven't seen that one before. Yeah.
There's lots, but I love this one because it's got two paintings behind him. The one on this side is a kind of a Chinese style painting, which is very influenced by Chinese art. And yeah. So
that's much later, right?
They're all, well, that's 1981.
Oh, I see, okay.
All the same, the roughly books are all...
Yeah. So again, the self and the making, the act of making is really very crucial to him.
Yeah, and just the last one, I mean, there's more, but this is just another...
Again, lovely.
Again,
these are terrific. These really have got to see the light of day.
I know, yes.
Lovely to see them.
So, but you can see the influence of Chinese painting to a certain extent here, and also kind of the emotional raindrops and slight despair, I think, possibly, but then of course it's about your interpretation of it, one's individual, you know, how you receive the work.
When I first went to see him, we had one link, which is that we were both, to my surprise, he'd read a writer I was slightly obsessively keen on, and still am actually, called John Cooper Purse. And the other artist I've met who really was at some point keen was Frank Auerbach, rather surprisingly. But Ken knew those novels very well, and he had quite a lot to say about them. But beyond that, he was very interested in obviously the whole language of fairy tales. And he lent me a book by Marie-Louise von Franz called The Feminine in Fairy Tale, which I think had been important to him. Any thoughts about that?
Well, he made me read it.
Ah,
So
yes, I see. And what do you feel?
Oh, I thought it was fascinating. I think this whole thing of, I mean, obviously a lot of association that he didn't like with people saying, oh, your painting is fantasy, your painting is Jungian based.
Jungian. He didn't want to be boxed in, did he?
Not at all. No. However, having said that, the whole point of fairy tales in a way is telling of a story that's from many different cultures or many different experiences, similar experiences across different cultures, whether it's death or fear or whatever it is. So I think, and the power of the feminine. And he's has some paintings which are not necessarily immediately pro-feminine, but actually, when you look at his way of thinking and what he thought about things, he was, it was, interesting.
He did feel that he was, I mean, he had a sense of, what can I say, worth, and one of them I think was that he was a sort of prophet of the feminine. I think it was important to him.
I do not think he would call himself ever a prophet. I just think
I used to mock him a bit, and I think he recognized that there was an element of that.
Yeah, well,
he did preach. Like I mean, you have to if you're teaching in an art school and you're giving a lecture on your work, you're sort of preaching.
You are, but that doesn't make you a prophet. He might have been, but I personally don't feel comfortable saying, yeah, he was happy.
I know. I'm half mocking him still, but still, I think he felt acutely that painting had taken a very masculinist turn, right. And he didn't want that. He just didn't want that.
What do you mean by masculinist turn?
Well, I think that a lot of people, I mean, this was a period, the 1980s, when you might say any self-respecting, intelligent, gifted woman would not choose painting. That's a gross generalization, and people like Paul Arago were refuting it, but there were, or Marlene Dumas, but they were very aware of it. I mean, there's a text by Marlene Dumas where she says all that. And so, and the reason that they wouldn't do it is that there was so much machismo associated with, especially the abstract expressionists, but obviously Picasso and the artist and model, the artist being clothed, the model being nude, You
also have who records the history of art, who's recording women that were there. People are now recording women that were doing stuff then that we didn't know about, particularly at the time, because it wasn't seen to be as, I don't know, relevant or interesting or fashionable. And we can see history being rewritten now a little bit, which I think is fantastic.
I think probably Ken died without knowing much about Alice Neal. You see, I didn't know much about Alice Neal until after 2000.
Okay.
Yeah. And she'd been 20 years dead by then.
Yeah. I'll have to read more of his diaries and letters to find out about that.
I didn't want to divert you from reading that passage. You were going to read something, weren't you?
Oh, I've got several passages. I don't know. I mean, again.
Yes, well, maybe one or two. Be nice. We can come back to it. But I think while we got you, it's great to have some reading.
Okay, I can write one that's slightly relevant to what you just said. It seems to me, and these are just random writings I've got.
Yeah.
There's a wad of them, so I just picked a few out. It seems to me that part of an artist's problem is to find a way of thinking about what he or she does. In the art schools and art world, this is a devastating problem because people are thinking and believe they ought to think with a medium that is not only inadequate, but the source of endless distortions. In other words, the medium being words. Art world thinking goes on, not only in words, but in the writer's grasp, which is not always a mastery, but a grasp of one particular language. And even within that language, much more onerous limitations are often accepted. So, I mean, that's just, I'm thinking his take on the difficulty of an art world that inevitably, because how can we say anything other than words? That's what we use. But how it can often not Well, you can just think about things too much, basically, or use words that can't describe. It's like music. How do you describe music in words? It's a strange thing, and yet we do it.
Let's have another image as well. One more image.
Oh, one more image.
Sorry. Okay.
Sorry, right, okay.
No, well, I'll just do this pair. We'll go back to the first one. Okay. Well, no, actually, stay with the Kitai, the image. That when I first, quite soon after I first knew Ken, I was suddenly asked to curate a show, a big show, from a very isolated position. I mean, I had written a bit, I'd shown a bit, but hardly at all. And it was a sort of refutation of the idea that subject matter was unimportant in painting. So I called it, for want of a better word, narrative paintings. This did not go down well with Ken, you see. And the catalogue had this painting on the front, which is by Kitai, who'd said famously in his youth, he said, when people said your work is too literary, he'd said, well, some books have pictures and some pictures have books, which is a good reply, I think. And Ken wouldn't be entirely in disagreement with that. He would admit that there would be links between his reading and his art, but he didn't like, let's go back now to talking with that he didn't like the idea that the forming of a work should be, as it were, secondary to the subject matter or the didactic intention or all that aspect of things. He felt that it was the forming that mattered. And so he was really quite fierce about that. To me, and to, I think in general, that was, his emphasis was on the act of making, the metamorphosis that a painting has to go through to be fulfilled, the way that color has to be enriched sometimes, and then maybe change its whole identity.
Yeah.
So it was very instructive to see him getting angry in a way about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said, is my dad's point of view, or where my dad's coming from, and not so much where you're coming from. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. I mean, I'm suspended. That's why I put one on the front and one on the back. I'm suspended between the two. I can see both points of view, but still, I mean, I suppose I do think that subject matter is important, and I think that part of his potency is to do with his subject matter.
Well, you can't argue with that in front of
no.
you. I mean, I think this is a great painting. I think it's great because it does both of those things.
Yeah.
You know? And also it's the content of it, and why is it so interesting, and why is it such an important painting? And
it's such an important part of the 20th century that I don't think anyone else has come up with such a great image of that confrontation.
And you're talking about the confrontation of someone talking to a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst?
Analyst.
And why is that so? Why do you think that's so important or so relevant? Or so, I mean, I think I know why, but what do you think is?
Well, I haven't had analysis actually, so or therapy even, but I can see that the whole release of unconscious this thing that Jung says actually, I think in 1911, he says, of the dream, it might be said that the stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the corner.
Okay.
That, in other words, the dream work, the sleep work. Now, a lot of Ken's best paintings are nocturnal. They are in a sense about. He doesn't literally transcribe dreams like Kubin does or something else, but they are the dream work is there, and I think that he set store by that side of things in a way that you don't get in the School of London.
True. I mean, I think it's, what I find interesting about it is that, well, I love the composition of this. I love the kind of variety of composition. The subject matter is really relevant. I think the saw and the hammer and the fork and so on, they're kind of, you could have them as tools of construction. He was always making things around the house, for example. It's not always kind of cutting things up or anything. It's, you can make things. I mean,
that's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah.
I mean, it's another silly anecdote from childhood. We had very little money. We couldn't afford beds. So he made me and my brother a bunk bed each. So we could store things on one bit and sleep on the top. So he made this whole bunk bed, one for each of us, which was fantastic, but he didn't sand it. So we just half of our childhood was spent just plucking splinters out of our fingernails regularly. Daily, just pluck a few things out, because that's what, you know. But no, it's very, so that, you know, so they're tools of construction as well. And I think what I think is interesting is that now mental health is coming to the fore, as it should do, as it has done the last 4 or 5 years. And I think that's kind of interesting that he was happy talking about it or showing it there.
He was, wasn't he? I mean, I did hear a lecture once where the implication of the person who introduced it was that, yes, Ken had an ongoing therapeutic relationship, and this was a sort of intellectual adventure. And he was very firmly against saying that. He said something like, you know, I wasn't right in the head.
Okay. Well, he wasn't sometimes, but then, you know, whatever. And
I don't think of him as a raging domestic tyrant, though. Is that right? I mean,
what do you mean domestic tyrant?
Was he hard? Or was he
did he
angry?
Oh, he's a furious person. He, you know, in terms of touching us, never, nothing.
No.
I would get angry. If he couldn't paint, he'd get really furious. Or if that was going, you know, but just at the painting, not at anyone else. I mean, he'd be really irritated, but he wouldn't, you know, he was just bad-tempered, which is quite different. And you know, if you've got to do something, you can't do it. Most people are going to be bad-tempered about it. But no, I think what's interesting about that is that he did see it as an academic intellectual exercise, and it can be intellectually very stimulating going to a therapist. So I think he got stuff from it like that as well. There's no way he just got it for being, you know, troubled. You know, we spoke a lot about, people often ask me what I speak about with him as a kid. A lot of it is psychological stuff, but never with, you know, Freud said blah, 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 or Jung said, or Klein said. It's more just the concept of theories, but then coming from kind of bouncing back into a very practical point of view of, you know, making bunk beds and stuff.
I mean, I think he had a real gift for words. I mean, he's a good writer, and I felt I had wonderful conversations from him, as it were. And I know other artists who feel the same, and he would give a whole day almost to a conversation.
Oh, I know. Yes. Yeah.
Let's move on. But I would love another passage or two if you've got it. Now, just in contrast to the kit eye, let's say, which I don't think he disliked the kit eye, particularly the painting, but he would contrast something like this big Miro, I can't remember, it's something like 6 or 8 foot, called the origin, the birth of the world, And he talks about how, you know, there are very few pictures that uses the word bare, that still hold the space in that way.
That's your opinion about this painting?
That's what he said.
Oh,
about it.
Interesting.
Yeah, the bareness of it.
There's a lot. I would say it's not bare, but then we're talking about Dad, not me.
Well, it's bare in the sense there isn't a lot on the surface. There isn't, compared to the kit eye, let's say.
Oh yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Very clearly. Yeah.
And I think he was interested in that. I just put this in because Anna put this, I'd forgotten almost having done this, but this is me, I mean, this might have an element of the mockery of the prophet. But what Anna noticed was his eyebrows.
Oh, yeah, his eyebrows were like that. Yeah. We'd cut them for him sometimes as kids, which, you know, anyway.
Well, like antennae, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
I'm sorry, I just want to say, I think there was a deep vein of humor in Ken.
Oh my God, massive. You can see from sketches, he was always telling jokes. If it was tough at home sometimes, the one thing that was always there was laughing. A lot of laughing and the stupidity of life and things and the ridiculousness. Yeah, very much so.
So I think I tried to get a bit of sense of that.
Yes.
Let's move on.
I love this one.
Yes, tell me more. I mean, there are a number of images which have got a river running through it, aren't there?
Mm-hmm.
And this probably is quite late, I think, in that sequence.
Oh,
no.
I'm not quite sure the date.
No, don't worry. Don't worry, just no, carry on.
Actually, right, I've got it right here though. No, I haven't, sorry.
Go on, no. Sorry.
Wait, so I love it because the intensity of the colour, the blue pastel is amazing, the red is kind of so vibrant. I love the mess of the horse, the man on horseback, and the kind of braveness of using, in the bottom right hand corner, it's got those kind of a few really thick single charcoal lines, and the kind of, to indicate rocks, I'm assuming, but kind of the braveness of using just kind of really simple thin lines, and the mess at the top. I love it. It's just, but it really is full of kind of potency. And in some ways you can see it almost, I think, as a bit of almost an abstract painting, because you've got, that blue is just wonderful. And the movement to me feels great. And like you can see at the bottom left, you know, he smudges it. And that might be an accident, I don't know, but he's, you know, he uses the pastels physically a lot, and he rubs out. I'm not sure there's any rubbing out there, but it's just multiple. It's like he's really mixing with the actual medium. You know, just it's part of him almost.
And I think he does have this sense of becoming of the molten image. Let's have the next one, because it's just, see, that's just a little drawing. Is that from a notebook?
Yes.
Yeah. And has that been, as it were, sold and packaged? Or no, this is still in the notebook. You see, I think it's fascinating to see the two together. That here, the area of darkness, the cloud area, becomes heads here, and in a way, the steps and the boat on the river.
Yeah.
And there are several others, aren't there? There's a whole sequence of where they're like variations on a theme, where the vertical river is the guiding thing, but so is the darkness.
Let me read you a bit. If you want some more reading, because I'm aware of time. I need to tell people that painting is painting. That amongst, and by the way, when I say painting,
let's have another image to get that in as well. Oh, sorry. Okay, go on. Yeah.
No, I just want to say, when he refers to painting, I think he often refers to painting and drawing as not totally dissimilar things. I mean, this is a sketch. The previous one I would say is a drawing. Anyway, I need people to tell me that painting is painting, that amongst all the anxiety and ideas, there is something that sings. I often feel so shaky that I forget it, need to be reminded. But sometimes the people who are telling me it are not really the people who are hearing the singing. Sometimes they just happen to believe the dogma that painting is painting. Then you usually wonder if they're out of touch with these subterranean rivers from which a newborn thing would get nourishment. But I'm grateful to the people who remind me, and I never know who the next person will be, to help me become conscious of the singing again. It could be anyone. So that's rather nice.
These just almost random, aren't they? We've just selected one or two little these notebook drawings.
Oh yeah, they're just ones that I just kind of came up with and sent you.
Let's have another one. Do you want to show us any more ones in your? There are a lot of ones of people making love, aren't there?
Oh, loads. What I particularly like about this one is that it's men and women, old and young. They're all happy and dancing. You know, it's kind of positive, I think.
Very much so. I mean, I think that is a quality in his art. But another one, yeah, that was really surprised me. I don't know if I would have recognized that as a Ken Kiff, you know.
Well, I love it. And again, what you can't really see here is the guy's face it's rubbed out. So it's kind of the kind of lightness is made with rubbing out, but it's very, I love it. Women rarely have pants on in his painting, so that's another interesting thing. It's again to do with the mask. What's the man doing? Is he taking it off? Is he putting it on? Is he helping her? Is he, you know, and it has a lot of potential discussion here. And then the use of the actual pastel as well. Again, it's, you know, is that a hill? Is that a head? You know, it's great. It's very free. I think it's quite free.
Let's go on. Another one. That's a lovely drawing, I thought. Is that it? I think I saw that on your website. Is that right?
I
No?
haven't seen this until you sent it to me.
Somebody sent it to you, so it was sold and exhibited. Yeah, I don't think I've seen it in the life, but it's a marvelous drawing.
No.
It's really got the sense of the night, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You used a phrase rather like, I mean, in my view, the best book so far, the most comprehensive book by far on Ken Kiff is by Andrew Lambeth.
Mm-hmm.
He has as his phrase of what the work is really about, the everyday invaded by the unknown. You said something like that earlier.
Well, I would say that's about right.
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the street we lived on. There's loads of pictures of the street we lived on and houses and dustbins, as you know. And
yeah. It really feels like South Wimbledon to me, that one. I remember just that feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another one? Yeah. So there are these amazingly violent images. Yeah. This is actually one of the ones that was in Narrative Paintings in 1979. And it's Mayakovsky blowing his brains out. It's rather jolly in a way.
I really like this one. I was going to say this is a result of living in Wimbledon for, lots of years, but that's by the by. But I think, I think it's great. I think it's funny. It's Mayakovsky who did blow his brains out. That's not great. But it's very alive and it's very, I just love it.
It's terrific painting.
Yeah.
It's one of the sequence, by the way.
Yes.
So it's acrylic on paper. Another one. This is one actually which I own, which I'm afraid I bought cut price as my reward for showing him or writing on him or something. And I've had it for almost 40 years now, and it's really never stopped being of interest to me. And it's just called Writing. So it obviously relates to some of the ones we've been seeing earlier. But again, you've got the stuff pouring out of his head. Now, I was very struck, a young artist who just won the John Moores, Catherine Maple, when she saw this, she said, she could, and Ken does polarize people.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah. Other people have said, this is inept. It's inept.
Yes, that's fine.
Total confidence. I just, to me, it's exactly the opposite. Or they say, as you say, it's childish, which I find it very sophisticated.
And also there's a question of taste. People just don't like certain things, and that's, they just don't happen to like this kind of work, or they don't like the content, or it's not, I think that's, but you're right, it does polarize people a lot. Yeah. Now,
I mean, the slightly different implication here is that he is, in a way, being nourished, as well as perhaps blown open by a muse, by a female.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is definitely looking towards her, isn't she? She is. And so that has a slightly different thing. And then there's the presence of the sun, what I take to be the sun up there. Yeah. And that's very often in his work, isn't it? Absolutely. The radiance, the yellow radiance of the sun.
Yes. Yeah. I think there was one picture which is fantastic, which is a black sun, and it's really menacing and it's wonderful. I haven't got access to it right now, but
no.
it was noticeable in its darkness and its heaviness.
Ah, yeah. One of the ones that you've still got.
Oh, yeah.
No. Let's have another one. Yeah, this is Mayakovsky, the poet Mayakovsky, inviting the sun to tea. It's a wonderful poem by Mayakovsky, not long before his suicide. It's quite a bit. This isn't acrylic on paper. This is, I think, oil on quite large board, as I remember. Well, it's got that lovely quality of humor.
Absolutely.
Anything to say, more to say?
No.
No. The scale is quite big. As I remember, it's sort of 4 or 5 foot, something like that. Another one. Walking the Dead Father.
Yeah, I love the title.
It's wonderful, isn't it? Now, his father died in an air raid when he was very young.
Well, he was the man that used to go along the roofs, bashing on the roofs when people hadn't blacked out their windows. So obviously it's a very dangerous job. So he was there.
I never knew that. But he told me he was an ostler at the bottom of Archway Hill.
He was what, sorry?
He had something to do with the horses that went up and down Archway Hill. I remember him telling me that. But well, maybe that was a stepfather.
Well,
one of his parents.
As well, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Can we just broach the issue which you really surprised me, that Ken's father was in fact Jewish?
Oh God.
Yes, which none of us knew, and he apparently did know, but a Lithuanian Jewish, we think, right?
The story goes that his parents are supposed to be both Jewish. I didn't find out until the day after Brexit, when a close friend of his and I were having lunch, and he said, "Oh, blah blah blah, what with your dad being Jewish and everything?" And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what?" And then it turned out that he said, "Oh, well, yeah, didn't you know?" And so a friend of a friend kind of did some research and so on, and two separate people done some research, and it turned out that they may have come from Lithuania, the Jewish enclave in Lithuania. And lots of things kind of point towards that. You know, parents living in the East End, coming over, you know, whatever. But it's not something he spoke about particularly. So we're all wondering, well, if he didn't particularly mention it, is it a big deal? It fits in art historically with the art that he likes, with the art that he kind of, you know, fits in with the much more kind of European sensibility, painting wise. But yeah, I'm kind of not sure what to do with that one.
No, it's recent news, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
My interpretation of this picture, which may not be acceptable, is that in a sense, this is the crucial figure. Sorry, the figure who's just walking along the side, the left-hand side. Mm-hmm. And that we could read everything else in the picture as his imaginings.
Could be. Could be.
Do you like that or not? So that one then has a different orientation. It's almost like a horizontal picture turned on its side.
That's a really interesting way of looking at it, yes. I think it's not the only way, but I think it's one very interesting way, yeah. But then you could also look at the little green chap. What's he? You know, is he kind of, but yeah, that could be an option. Also, where's the main guy's head? Oh, it's there to the left, isn't it? Yeah.
The yellow is wonderful there. It's not very well reproduced in my book, unfortunately, because the yellow is extraordinary. I think what he does with that.
And also the curiosity of the kind of industrial tower and the smoke.
Yes.
That's quite interesting as well, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this again is where the colour is almost as important as the form.
What's slightly missing from the selection we've made is the sort of landscape element, which is quite big in some of his work. I mean, and there are quite a lot of horizontal pictures that have caves and streams and so on. We just, somehow we haven't ended up with those. But have a look at the Andrew Lambeth monograph or any of the books, actually. Another one?
I love this one as well.
I do too. I've actually drawn from this a few times. Yeah.
I like the splitting of the body, the splitting of the face, the walls, the kind of white paint kind of coming through the kind of face and the body and everything. And also, being a sequence painting, you'll see that all the edges aren't...
a cup of tea.
Well, no, but there's the actual edges of the painting. He's painted right over the brown paper. And I remember when John, the collector, bought a lot of these paintings, so he loves them. He kind of, when he got them, he kind of unframed all of them to reveal this working. I think this is kind of part of the point of the picture, is the paint going on to the, maybe we've got it wrong, I don't know, but part of the paint going over into the brown tape.
No, I think it's an important issue. And I can tell you a sort of anecdote about that I've had for years a wonderful framer called Chris Appleby, who I introduced to Ken because he framed, he had, I think with great sensitivity, framed the painting I had with the brown tape showing. And Ken, I think, was struck by it, and thereafter used Chris as his framer. And Chris is a very good painter in his own right.
Yes. Yes.
So that was interesting. I think it is essential to have the brown.
Yeah.
Brown tape. Any more?
Well,
I mean, it's a, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, go. Carry on. I have a feeling, is that a black and white reproduction of a coloured work?
No, it's a charcoal. It's a charcoal drawing, bought by Garner Tullis, or maybe given to Garner Tullis, the guy who did lots of
Garner Tullis, oh, that's
with.
who is his printer in America.
Yeah, who was fantastic. You mentioned right at the beginning about the difference between oil paintings and sequence paintings being the speed of the medium. With the monotypes, Dad would make, and I went over to New York to see him work once. He would work so fast, encouraged by Garner, and it was so anti his way of working, but it produced some fantastic new stuff, some different stuff. And this is one of the ones that Dad gave Garner, or Garner bought off Dad, I'm not quite sure.
It's a beautiful one. I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one. Oh, yes. Now, when he went to the National Gallery, this was really a very testing time for him. I don't think it was entirely a happy time, really, because he actually felt terribly critical of the sort of typical art historical mindset, and not least because he felt that they still really regarded most art as well, their heroes would be, let's say, Auerbach and Freud, rather than Picasso and Matisse. And he really felt that. And his own taste was especially for the early people, and he felt that there was language. This is Giovanni di Paolo, the Sienese. And in my interpretation, well, I think it's obviously, it's about the child pilgrim going up the mountain, and you even get a glimpse of what he's going into beyond. And perhaps looking, I mean, I interpret it as perhaps that is the same gate, looking down from the mountain. You see what I mean? So you've got a huge journey included within that. And this has always been a key picture for Ken, about 1450, something like that. And let's just see the two. I don't think he felt he ever fulfilled either of these. Let's just see the two of the versions. That's the etching, one of the, more than one etching, I think.
Yeah, it's dry point. That one's a dry point.
Hmm?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's a dry point on the bottom.
Dry
line.
point, yes, okay. And this is a pastel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And let's just see one other of the National Gallery. This is by someone, maybe the school of, but it's Joachim Patinier, who's just pre-Bosch at St. Jerome. And then the next one. So after the Indian journey, which you were part of,
yes,
Kali enters for certain periods. The horror, the sort of wonderful horror of Kali, but he's there with St. Jerome, as it were, and she's across the river. And what doesn't quite, it's quite a big drawing, and the pink is marvelous. Just the hint of pink makes all the difference. So
what I will say is that he was doing this before he went to India. There's a big misconception that he'd only started after India. He was definitely influenced when he was in India, but these had started before he actually went there.
Kali.
Yeah. Which I think
is that so? I didn't know that. Oh.
Yeah. And maybe it's not important to bring it up. But
what's your memory of Kasoli Camp?
Oh God, I was 13. I lost loads of weight.
Did you go to the lectures?
Yeah. There was nothing else to do, and so it was actually a fantastic experience. Talking to people, I'd meet the artists, some of the artists' daughters. Every evening there was a lecture about one particular artist. There's full of artists in this kind of massive house with art historians as well. And we'd have lectures every evening, and then there'd be like there's a local women's feminist theatre group coming in and would do performance, and local mask makers would come and do a week of making masks from various Indian stories and so on. So it was extremely interesting. Yeah.
Well, Vivan and Geisha are still alive and still they've just founded a new foundation trying to they didn't go on with Kasali for very long. Kasoli, whatever. I never got there. But I was very glad Ken went. But he was sort of, he had a mixed feeling about it, didn't he? Sometimes.
You may know more about that than I do, actually.
Yeah. Anyway, it's interesting. Good.
We're at 8 o'clock. Is that okay?
Sorry?
We're at 8 o'clock. I'm just wondering.
I mean, let's just go on a little bit further. It's all right, I think. Shall we just go through some images? See if you want to say something. The violence is there. Is he eating the sun?
Yes, I think so.
No. Another one.
That man spitting.
And there are others, aren't there, of people being sick and sitting. This is another wonderful dry point with lovely hair.
And I will also bring in the Chinese thing here, because he was very much interested in Chinese landscapes. Of course, when I was practicing acupuncture, we'd both read, it sounds very pretentious, but we would read a lot of Chinese poetry, discuss Chinese philosophy, not your normal, childhood thing, and a lot of Chinese painting. And of course, one of the images in Chinese acupuncture is the whole body as being kind of a landscape. And that's how, in some ways, how the theory of acupuncture actually works. Very tenuous, but it's there. And this is a classic example, I think, of Dad's being influenced by Chinese paintings of this specific painting, where there's, a flower in his knee and a horse on the thigh and a fish in the heel,
And of course he did, we haven't got a good example here, but he did look a lot at Chinese painting too.
He's got a fantastic library of just amazing art books with a lot of Chinese stuff, and Indian and all kinds of people. But
the Chinese in relation to acupuncture and so on is rather interesting.
Well, it's very interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, we connected a lot over that, actually.
Yeah. I just put in Chagall because it was a time when Chagall had become very unfashionable among artists, and Ken always stood up for Chagall, especially in the early days. He thought that this is a big picture when you see it in the life of Philadelphia, kind of life-size figure. And he always thought that was a masterpiece. The Poet at 3 a.m., is it called? Something like that. I heard it, 4 a.m. But I think he found the whole relation of the head and the space wonderful.
And the lines make everything possible. You don't have to, the colouring is not logical. Forms can kind of go in and outside of the lines, and colours in and outside the lines. It's interesting.
I don't know if it's worth bringing in at this point, but there was a very controversial thing. I think I do want to say that.
Okay.
That John Hoyland, who also taught at Chelsea, obviously had an idea about Ken. And in an interview, he said in 1980, which was just when I was really getting to know Ken's work, but if you turn your back on all that understanding of what has gone on in modern art, you're going to end up doing some idiosyncratic little kind of painting that doesn't belong to anything, like an escape, like Ken Kiff or something, or somebody, painting your own nightmares. And so this was, of course, created the moment it was published, lots of people were up in arms because they knew that Ken was so steeped in what the whole issues of modernism. And he'd simply, he'd thought it through in a different way to John Hoyland.
They're just thinking differently. John Hoyland wasn't totally wrong.
No.
And, they painted very differently, both loved colour.
But I think one does want to try and refute the idea that that Ken was a total solipsist. You see?
Oh God, yeah, no,
we talked just briefly that he did vote, and he was of the left.
Yes, he was very. One little passage he wrote, and he spent a whole time writing about. He kind of posed himself some questions that someone might pose it to him, and he answered them. Well, he's talking a lot about the unconscious. Well, it says here, if your stuff about the unconscious is right, what's to become of that urge that a bright young person has to sort things out, to do things to society, to change things, or an old person for that matter, or anyone sickened by what's going on in the world? And he was very aware. We would watch the news, we'd talk about it. He was not pro Maggie Thatcher. So he wasn't.
He was angry about Maggie Thatcher, wasn't he?
Curious, yeah. But he wasn't solipsistic any more than any other artist. To a certain extent, you have to be solipsistic as you are painting to a certain extent. maybe not all the time, but yeah, he was very much aware of what was going on politically and societally. Yeah.
We can press on.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. This is a painting I like very much, quite big, which actually I sort of engineered the Arts Council to buy at the time.
Yeah.
And he was very tricky because, you know, he took it back and reworked it and didn't want to relinquish it. But he probably did the right thing. He probably did the right thing. But it was I think it's called Portrait of My Stepfather from Memory, or Portrait from Memory, but it is actually about one of his stepfathers.
Yeah.
And it's another string to his bow. Let's go. We'll carry on. Okay. This is one of the street drawings we were mentioning. Somebody else on that same team buying work, when I mentioned Ken Kiff, said, "Oh no, not Ken Kiff, all them hobbits." And that again, you know, reflected a sort of general view, all them hobbits. Now, and there is a hobbit like look to this, but I think it says something true about the nature of the street as well. And there's the pollarded willow I was referring to.
Well, what I think more about this, what strikes me, is that there are several men with bowler hats indicating certain kind of jobs and backgrounds and ways of thinking, with legs. So there's no body, there's no visceralness about them. They're kind of heads on legs, blindly going to work, which is very kind of damning in itself, I guess.
And he would have, I mean, a bit earlier, you would have seen, I remember people in bowler hats all going off to work and rolled umbrellas.
I know. But then you've got this kind of crazy creature in the bottom coming out of that house, looking like some kind of golem type figure. I know he felt very kind of repressed by normal society and the kind of I think he was, we think he was epileptic as a child, and he was obviously a little bit bright and a bit kind of odd, and he didn't fit in particularly, and, you know, so I think there's a lot of isolation, I suspect.
He didn't actually have epilepsy, did he? He had fits, but not epilepsy.
Yeah, there's some kind of fitting that he had that wasn't epilepsy, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, we'll have another one. So when it came to the painting, it has a slightly different feel, less fluid perhaps. But this is, I think, one of the most successful of quite a big group of street scenes, which aren't quite resolved in a way. I mean, I think he had more to say than he ever did say about this particular.
You mean generally, or with the street paintings? The
street paintings, generally, definitely, but even the street painting, I think he had. There were possibilities even in that drawing that aren't in this painting or in any of the others. Really, I think they're potentially very, very interesting to me. Genre.
Yeah. I mean, Andrew Lambeth described this as a Bosch in his book as being Bosch-like, which I thought was quite.
Now, I just want you to notice this theme of putting something in a dustbin, because next one, he actually took it from a painting of mine, which was exhibited in the narrative painting show. And a few weeks later, after that show, let's have another one. This arrived in the post, which is a little watercolor, very nice, of a dustbin. And another one, and quite a lot of images that I like very much by him make good use of this theme of the dustbin and so on. Better use than I did. I destroyed that painting.
Why?
I don't know. I couldn't live with it. I just couldn't. You know, I probably made a mistake. I imagine Ken destroyed a few.
He didn't do much of that.
He left them unfinished.
I cleared them all out at the end when he died. It was, yeah.
Most artists destroy a certain amount, I think. But anyway, so this is one of the last of our images. And there was a mass of still, I think, uneditioned lithographs in Sweden, right?
what was the question again?
They weren't there was a Swedish guy doing some lithographs of him, which I don't think were ever fully editioned.
No, but there's a whole contention about that. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of work we haven't really seen, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's true. There is, yeah.
So it's exciting, and I'm just throwing in one little watercolor, which seems marvelous to me. Was that one of your choices?
No, it was your choice, but it's a very nice one.
Yeah.
Watercolor. Yeah.
Anna, perhaps we should now throw it open to questioning, if they don't mind, if everyone hasn't left.
Fallen asleep yet.
Thank you both so much. What a illuminating conversation, and for taking us through these such compelling and mysterious images. It's been really wonderful, and thank you, especially Anna, for sharing the sketchbooks and these unpublished writings. That's been really fascinating. So lots of appreciation from the audience too, everyone listening. I just wondered, there are quite a few questions, and I'll come to them, but I just wondered, going through when you took over your father's estate and you were going through all these works, and I imagine them, you must have discovered so many works that you didn't know, or you got to know them in a different way, and sort of with a new kind of intimacy. I just wondered how it changed your relation with his work.
Expanded ridiculously.
Yeah.
I mean, we had this, it was just bonkers. We had so much stuff. We are still logging stuff now. There's still about 2 folders we haven't gone through yet. And it's, we discover the big things first, then smaller things. Mm-hmm. But there's some beautiful small paintings, tiny ones like this. And just lots of writings and lectures, and there is no lack of, stuff to be looking at. Yeah.
Very exciting. Well, turning to some questions from people listening, Ian Andrews is asking, well, there's 2 questions. One is about, did Ken talk about having played with plasticine a great deal as a child? So yeah, intrigued by that.
Who asked the question?
Ian Andrews.
I don't know who this person is, but
oh right, sounded like he knew him.
No, my dad was always playing with plasticine, always, all the time. As kids, all we played with was bloody plasticine. I think sculpture. It's no bloody surprise, because I lived in the childhood was playing with plasticine, and he actually made at one point a little cowboy figure with boots that you could take off and on with plasticine. So it was just yeah. And
then Eileen Hogan's just thanking you for such a good conversation, and asking whether Ken spent many years in psychoanalysis, and she goes on to ask Anna whether, children of artists, she says, often don't get enough time from their artist parent. Do you feel that was the case for you? So 2-fold question.
First question, he wouldn't go regularly, he'd go erratically. So you wouldn't call it, being in therapy or being in analysis, because he would go for, say, 3 or 4 weeks, once a week, and then he wouldn't go for a year or 2, and then he'd go a lot intensely. So it's kind of as and when he needed it. So it wasn't a traditional form of therapy as we now would expect it to be, or even then expect it to be. So,
and was that always with Kevin O'Dowd?
And there was someone else as well. I can't remember. There was someone else's name I can't remember, but he was one of them. Yeah, the one, I think the main one actually. Yeah. And the other question, yeah, he did. He spent a lot of time painting. In terms of a question of children of artists, yeah, he was at home the whole time. So that was one thing. So he would always be at home.
So the studio was in the house. Yeah.
So the 2 big rooms in the house, with a front room downstairs, which was his studio, and the main bedroom upstairs, which was his storeroom. So he took the 2 biggest rooms in the house.
And they weren't I should have said that, they weren't kind of impressive, were they? He had files, and he had paintings slotted away in all stages. He was working on many at once, in fact.
Yes.
Really a lot, maybe 30 or 40. One sense that there were ongoing pictures.
Yeah.
It was so interesting seeing that sort of, just thinking further about psychoanalysis, the sort of play with the shadow, with the mask, with those sort of figures that haunting, and then they don't, some anyway didn't seem threatening. I think you use that term, you know, whether they're threatening or menacing, but then also that those images of sort of expelling or releasing, it's really, yeah, intriguing to see that sort of evolving in different media.
And seriously, I think that's very important to him, that the idea that at the end of this process, which might have anguish and angst and all the rest of it, there would be healing. There would be, that really was that was him at his most earnest, and you know, he's saying something.
Yes, and it felt often that colour was saying that. I think you were sort of foregrounding that at the beginning.
Radiance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a question about the sketchbooks and whether they'll be published. Rosie Voro is saying that it'd be wonderful to read more of his words about painting, and I agree.
I want to do very much. I am passionate about the sketches. I think they're fantastic. I'd like them to be seen somehow, whether it's in a book or exhibition. That means taking them out of the actual sketchbook. And the writings, yeah, we're literally starting to go through the writings now and see what we can do with them to shape them. And he photocopied every letter he wrote. I mean, that's a bit weird, but he photocopied every letter he wrote. So we had files and files of letters as well.
Interesting. So conscious of posterity, conscious of this.
I guess so. But also he kind of worked things through. Like he'd write a letter, then he'd write it 2 or 3 times, and then he'd keep all the writings, and you could see the way he would develop his thinking. So I actually kind of think his letters were part of him sorting things through, like almost like a kind of a diary, not quite.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, and the sort of revisory process, and I wonder how that relates to the sketchbooks, working things through. And yeah, that's yeah, really intriguing. Perhaps one last question. Oh, there's lots of questions. So there's a question about whether he ever talked about his Serpentine show and about working with school children.
To me or to Tim?
For me.
Yeah, I suppose.
Sorry, just to rephrase it. A question.
Just a question about whether he talked much about the Serpentine show. I suppose how he felt about that show.
You mean before it or after? He did a poster for it for a start. He got fully involved.
Which we can't find, which got lost. So if anyone finds it, that would be fantastic to see. It wasn't played.
The person who put it on, Alistair Warman, has died this year, and a fine, very thoughtful person. And I think Ken was happy about the Serpentine show. I think he felt he had quite enough control, and so on. But and there was a lot of response. It didn't go unnoticed or anything. But there should surely have been another museum show in the course of the next, I don't know, 20 years, almost 20 years. I think it's very surprising that no one has done it since his death, because there are literally, I think I know about 200 artists who are interested in Ken Kiff, and I don't believe that it's an unpopular choice.
Well, we're working on it. We're working on it.
Yeah, I was going to say, hopefully there's one in the making. Well, there's just perhaps one last question here, which is about whether he talked about his dreams.
He wrote about dreams. Oh, sorry.
Ah.
He wrote some of his dreams down. So I have books of his dreams that I've chosen not to read because I don't want to. Yeah. But yes, he did, and he would talk about his dreams. Not when I was a child, obviously, but just kind of occasionally. But maybe I think more to people like Tim, possibly. I don't know.
He definitely didn't want his art to be a transcription of dreams. He was very explicit about that. But he felt that the sequential nature of a dream was parallel to, he's written this, that the symbol construction of a dream is parallel to the symbol construction of a painting. I think that's a good formulation. There's some way in which the same things crop up in different forms as they do in dreams, and they gradually metamorphose, sometimes resolve themselves, sometimes insist on themselves. You see what I mean? So I think that was the analogy he would make to dreams, especially. But that was what he brought to Kevin O'Dowd or Jungian therapists might be something else.
I don't know. We'll never know.
No, we don't know. We don't know. But he wasn't secretive, was he?
Oh no, not
No,
particularly.
he really wasn't.
No, there's a question about well, which sort of relates to that, was sort of asking whether you, Anna, witnessed him working. You know, whether I suppose with the studio in the house, it was part of your daily life. And
I'd always go in. Yeah, I mean, I remember one time. Yeah,
he did eventually rent another studio, but it didn't really work out for him.
No, a little bit, but not really.
In fact, I inherited two big pictures that he had, two big canvases that he did. Your mother Jane gave me, because my studio was around the corner in the East End, and so I took them from the studio. He never got round to making these big to actually painting on them.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful opportunity to hear from you both and to hear these insights. And I really hope, and along with so many in the audience who've really appreciated this talk and the insights you've given, that we have, you know, more opportunities to see his work and hopefully an exhibition and further publications in the near future. But thanks once again.
Well, thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.